At the ANU, he's now working as a postdoc. So your PhD was looking at genetic patterns in these macaws, and you saw him climbing the tree in the film. And so a lot of hard work has gone into that work. So George, would you like to take a seat? Get up there. So George also coordinated this evening's event and this documentary that you just saw. Rod Peakall, Professor Rod Peakall is in the School of Biology at ANU, and he's an evolutionary biologist and conservation geneticist. He's been working on many different plants and animals, mostly using genetic analyses, including fungi and birds and orchids and all sorts of things. So Rod, please come up the front. And last but not least, Professor Rob Heinsohn, who's in the Grammar School at the ANU, and he's a conservation biologist and evolutionary biologist as well, and mostly works on birds. Is that a fair statement? Please come up, Rob. All right, so I'm going to kick off with a few questions. So, have you got the mic? Where's the mic?
Yeah.
You've got it? All right, so George, start with you. You had a lot to do with the making of this film. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the film and how it came to be?
Depends how much time you have.
A few minutes.
All right, I try. Thanks everyone for coming. First of all, yeah, it's been a very long story, and it was really just amazing to see, like hopefully not the end, but the premiere of our documentary. So it all started. I started to work in this reserve in 2008 before I started my PhD with ANU, and that was one of the main reasons I started to do a PhD. I wanted to do research on macaws, so I stayed there and got more involved in the work of the reserve and the ecotourism company, their very first expedition. And I was fortunate enough to have some really good friends from Hungary who worked in a nature documentary unit. It's called filmjungle.eu, and a very good friend of mine, and who is also the director of this film, Cynthia Gary, came down to visit me in a few breeding seasons and actually helped me in the genetic lab in Lima as well. So she's a filmmaker and a biologist. So she took her camera, of course, with her, and we just documented everything around us, like nature and work. Rainforest expeditions asked us to also do some short videos for them, so we also filmed for them while doing the PhD, the field research, and then later I also started to work with rainforest itself, so in the tourism business, and became one of the managers of one of these lodges. So I did that for a year, and that was like really more and more involvement, not just the business, the rainforest expeditions, ecotourism company, but also with the native community of Infierno. And we established a very good relationships with them, and you know, we also already had all those footage, and I know exactly the date, on the 5th of December in 2011. When we first sit down with Cynthia, and we saw like, oh, there's a really good story. There's a story building up, and we should make something to spread the word about this. Like, because rainforests there, I think it's just made an incredible job to convincing these communities and start the business. Like, it's really hard to do even like just research or being there, but. It was like, I think, an amazing effort to convince all those people and start building a whole company, and now we have 4 ecologists there, and it's a great model that works really well for conserving that region. So what our aim was with this film is to spread this word to a wider audience, not just in Peru but internationally, because we thought this model our platform can be applied in other areas as well with similar problems or conservation issues. So, and then I came back to Canberra, and the whole project was a bit left behind. We had all those terabytes of great footage, but hasn't been used. And then in 2014, we got back together and thought like, oh, we should do something with all those amazing videos, but we just didn't have the money to build a professional film out of it. So they started a crowdfunding project, and that was really successful. It was amazing to see how many people contributed to this effort, and we really thankful for all those people who contributed, and I know lots of them are actually sitting in this room, so thanks very much for your contribution, and everyone else's that you also saw the names in the end of the movie. And so with that we had the money and we had the footage, and 2 years later here we are. We assembled the movie and finished it finally. It took a bit longer than we expected for 2 years. It was because mainly challenges of like all the new technology developing, and we kept going back to Peru with more and more and newer technologies. First we just had an HD video camera, then a full HD, then we had last time a 4K and some drones coming with us, and then we saw the drone footage, like, oh, we need to include this definitely in the movie because it would have so much. So we just like kept delaying a little bit, but I think it's totally worth it, and I hope you like it.
We liked it. Ask a couple more questions of each of the panelists and then open it up to the floor. So Rod, apparently this is the first time you've seen the film, is that right? And did you like it?
That's right. Am I on the air?
Yes. Can people hear Rod?
Can you hear? So firstly, yes, this was the first time I've seen the premiere, like you, and wow, George, thank you very much. Congratulations to the entire team. I know that Cynthia and the other photographers worked extremely hard. The team that put it together have done a fantastic job. One of the things that impressed me was that you combined the biology, the science and the conservation, but you wasn't shy in actually exploring some of the issues. And the big issue of gold mining, I remember flying over Canberra, looking down and seeing those incursions into the rainforest of the illegal mining. I didn't actually get too close to that on the ground, and I'm glad I didn't. It was dangerous to do that. But certainly, I think you handle that sensitively at the same time as raising awareness of the issue. So, well done. I mean, it's a spectacular place to visit. If you get a chance, I strongly recommend you talk to Active Travel about the opportunities. I plug for you, Active Travel. The thing that I was vividly reminded of was an amazing conversation with the manager of the SADA. This was just after Rainforest Expeditions had handed over the management to the local people, and the excitement and the enthusiasm of the local people and the manager in particular about this opportunity, which now in 2016 I think is completely going to be handed over, was just amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. So, Rob, you also went to Tambopata a couple of times. Do you want to say something about some of those visits?
Yeah, I guess so. I think I might have had one too many discos to it.
You want to slur something about it?
I did have the good fortune of visiting George twice at his field site. But first of all, I want to say George is probably the hardest and toughest field biologist I've ever known. You would not believe the hardships he's gone through, so many different ways. The logistical difficulties are amazing. George just pulled it off. He's absolutely amazing. I'll say that. I did go there twice. Things that come to mind when I think about visiting George in Peru. One is that it's incredibly remote. You know, not only is Peru a long way away from Australia, but once you get there, you have to take a long flight inland, and then you have to go upriver for many hours by boat, very long, uncomfortable boat ride, and then you finally arrive at the field site. And it is absolutely amazing there. It's a vast area that's really been protected well. It's very uplifting. It's very heartwarming. To me personally, it's important that such places still exist, you know, in a troubled world and everything's disappearing so fast. This is a part of a corner where they're really doing things that matter, that are really protecting what's important in terms of biodiversity and landscape beauty. So it's a beautiful place, it's heartwarming. The logistical difficulties need some mention. I went there twice. The first time I went did not work very well. Everything went wrong. The second time I went, everything went beautifully and perfectly, so I finished on a good note. But on the first trip, we were going upriver, we just came on a boat ride upstream, and about halfway up there we heard a terrible clunk, and that was the outboard motor breaking down. And the poor driver was in the middle of this fast stream, being pushed downstream very quickly. The boat was turning sideways, we were in danger of toppling over. It's pulling the cord, and we couldn't get it going again. So he managed to get us to the riverbank, and my first evening in the Peruvian Amazon was spent camped on a muddy riverbank in a cloud of mosquitoes. There were sweat bees, it was hot and sweaty, and we couldn't have been more miserable if we tried.
It's the authentic experience.
Absolutely.
We had wine.
We had wine, that's right, that helped. We were rescued the next day by the one supply boat that was going up that week. If we hadn't achieved that, we would have been there for a very long time. Even that was hard. We had to hail them from the other side of the river. The rivers there are very wide. There is so much water in that landscape, you wouldn't believe it. So several hundred metres away, the boat putting up the stream, we managed to hail them down. They waved towards it, and we yelled and screamed and hollered, and they came and rescued us and pulled us the rest of the way upstream. That was my first taste of logistical difficulties in terms of George's field site. It took 3 weeks for new parts to turn up. We were very limited in what we could do. It wasn't the perfect trip. The second trip was February this year. I'll cut a long story short, we made it to the most beautiful region in the world. It's the remote Canberra Valley. It's the place where time forgot. It's just so remote, you wouldn't believe it. People have never lived there, not even native people. And what really sticks in my mind was having our camp staked out one night by a jaguar. It arrived at about 9 p.m. It sat about 10 metres away from the camp, and it stayed there all night until 5 a.m. It scared us, you know what, all night long. We have some beautiful photos to show for it, and that's just burned into my memory. This jaguar, it wasn't aggressive, it wasn't shy, it was simply curious. It had probably never seen people before, and that's what that place is all about. And I think I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Rod. Okay, Rod, now this film talked a little bit about the science that was being done but didn't go into details. And I've already said that George was working on the genetics of the macaws. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you found in those genetic results?
Sure, but just before I go on to the genetics itself...
Talking to the top of the mic.
Sorry, just before I go on to the genetics itself, just to recap some of the logistical nightmares of this place. It's incredibly beautiful and looks fantastic on the documentary. But you have to realise that George has to work there in the wet season, and by wet season I mean rain, more rain, and it's 30 plus degrees, 100% humidity. It's excruciatingly difficult. And then the challenge is to get up the river, and as we've heard, that can take you 3 weeks instead of 3 hours. And that's one thing, to get up the river through these furious floodwaters of the river system. And then you've got to get off, and that's the easy part, go and collect your feathers. That seems pretty straightforward. But then the challenge of actually getting birds from nests, you saw some fantastic footage of that. That was done in the comforts of the vicinity of Tamborpada Nature, Tamborpada Lodge, not far from, civilization, if you like. But when you're up the river, another day's drive away, we had to hack our way through the jungle. It took us an hour, 4 of us with machetes, dodging spiny plants, skipping around ferocious ants, and we got to the tree. George ropes up, and I look up with binoculars and say, "Hang on, George, I think that's just a little bit dangerous." He tugs the rope, and the top of the tree just about fell on top. Meanwhile, our boat driver, the indigenous boat driver, had begun to hack his way to the next nest tree and managed to do that without us having to give him too much of a hand. We got there a little later, and here he was, completely, absolutely exhausted, sleeping at the base of the tree. That's all in a day's work in Tamborpada. So these are incredibly difficult conditions to be working in. So one of the real challenges of working with these birds, quite aside from all those logistical difficulties, is actually catching the birds is difficult. And you can catch birds at nest, and George showed us very nicely in the video that you can do that. You can't do that with lots of birds. And the key thing that George achieved in his PhD project was to firstly ask the question, can we use the sort of techniques that we use in forensic laboratories every day around the world and apply those techniques, the same DNA techniques, to feather samples Now feathers, if they're in good condition, provide a little drop of blood, and from that little drop of blood we can get some DNA. From that DNA we can ask a whole series of questions. So we can ask, we can individualise birds, we can then ask how many birds are using the clay lick. We can ask, is it just males, is it females, is it juveniles? We can ask a little bit about how many clay licks those individual birds that we can put a genetic tag on are using. And I guess the plain English sort of version of this, just to end on a light note, is to ask the following questions. Do macaws only just go to the local supermarket for food, or do they shop around? Is it mum or dad, or both, to do the shopping? What do they do with the kids? Do they stay home, or do they go shopping too? When the kids finally leave home, where do they go? Do they move to the next suburb in Canberra, or do they bolt for the big smoke Sydney, Melbourne? And these sound like trivial questions, and of course I've trivialised them, but these are fundamental questions to understanding the biology of these organisms. And while George strategically chose to work on macaws because they were accessible and in that location they're not endangered, what he's actually been able to do is demonstrate that this technique works and we can now apply it to endangered species.
Thanks, Rod. A question the accessible, having seen George scanning the trees and grabbing macaws. So you've painted, both of you have painted a really intense picture of working in the Amazon. George, do you think you'll be going back to Peru?
Never again. I'm just kidding. Well, I haven't really planned anything to go back and do research or something, but I was just fine by active travel. The local travel agency in Canberra, and they asked me to organize a trip. So that's what we're promoting tonight as well. Like, if you're interested, you can sign up. So it seems like I might go back in next September next year.
Will you have to climb any trees?
Hopefully not, but I might. So that's not the breeding season yet, but that's why we chose the date, because September is still before the really rainy season, but end of the dry season. So it's a really good time to visit. And so we probably go to Lima for a few days to see the cultural background of Peru, which is really interesting as well. And very diverse, just like the Amazon, where we would find after that and spend 2 weeks visiting all these lodges that you saw in the movie, the native communities, the Oxbow Lakes, and of course the Tamupata Macaw Project as well. And very interesting new novel thing that Rainforest Expedition just started in Refugio Amazonas is called the Wild Amazon, where we can actually, anyone can be involved in research, just even in 2 weeks. And so that's more like a popular science activity that you can contribute your own work to scientific research and maybe discoveries, like we do barcoding of life on site and using drones for botany, and we call that aerobotany. And all sorts of stuff, really interesting things like that. And this would be one of the first trips that would feature that kind of popular science research in the Amazon. So this might be happening. So if you're interested, just ask our representatives outside Active Travel, and also the income, part of the incomes of this trip is planned to go back to partly to the research, and the other part is to the native community. We try to set up clean drinking water for the community, because that's one of the biggest issues that we would like to help still.
Okay, sounds awesome. I would get involved, but it's about 30 degrees too hot for me. That's why I work in the Antarctic. So just one last question for you, George. You talked about how this film has been made to try to get the conservation issues out there and get people interested, and I'm sure the film Rio, which none of you have seen and should, will also help with that. I don't work for, I just really love animated films. So do you want to tell us what your plans are for getting this film out there? Is it going to be on TV or on the internet?
Yeah, we don't know exactly yet. So we have an English version that you just watched, and we also have a Spanish version that we're distributing mainly in Latin America, and South America, and Central America. So there's definitely going to be a Peruvian version and screening in the national TV in Peru later this month. And with the English version, we work with Fun Force, which is an on-demand cinema initiative that you can see the link here. I was just basically on the phone with them a few hours ago, and they launched this site for us. So if anyone would be interested to see this movie anywhere in Australia, like any other locations, in any other cinemas, you can go to their link. This is quite a new setup, so we felt like, oh, give it a try and see how it works. So people can go there to this link and have request a screening, and if they have enough people requesting, then they will make a local screening somewhere in Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, somewhere else, or maybe in Palomino here in Canberra. So if you know anyone who might be interested, we can also send you out this link later on, and we might be able to get it into SBS or ABC later on maybe next year.
All right, so my last question for the panel, Rob. How did you know? It's like we had this plan. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how this study, what sort of implications this study might have for Australian bird conservation?
Well, conservation genetics, it's one of the pillars of conservation science, and what George has been doing has been very much at the forefront, especially his ability to get those genetic samples from birds without catching them. He gets it from the dropped feathers of the clay lids, and the power that brings to studying the birds without ever disturbing them, and getting the knowledge and information indirectly, it just can't be overstated. It's changing our world and how we view things and how we do things. But stepping back a little bit, I need to mention that parrots are the most endangered bird group in the world. Roughly 1/3 of the species are threatened with extinction. And George did a very clever analysis about this some time ago. They're in dire straits. Their populations are dwindling all around the world. Habitat loss, habitat changes, being poached from the wild. There's multiple threats that they face. Here in Australia, we have our problems too, and I'll mention one species really briefly. That's our orange-bellied parrot. You might be aware of some crowdfunding and publicity that we did recently about this. These birds breed in the southwest of Tasmania. This year, and they migrate every year, and this year only 13 birds came back from migration. So there are only 13 wild birds left in the whole world, one spot in a remote part of the southwest of Tasmania. What's worse, only 3 of those were female. So there are 3 breeding females left. And we've launched an emergency intervention with in partnership with the Tasmanian authorities and a few other organisations to try and get them back. But again, coming back to George's work, genetics is a big part of that. Having the pedigrees of those birds, understanding who they are individually, and even their genetic profiles, it allows us to work with that population, that tiny remaining population. And as we nurture it back to health, having maximum genetic diversity, being able to get the DNA from feathers, shepherds, that type of thing is going to help our cause incredibly. So many endangered parrots in the world. George's work is really helping, not just in Peru, but his work is going to help the cause worldwide. And I think that's probably enough for me. Yep.
Thanks. All right, so I'm going to open it up to the floor now. We'll take a few questions, and just so you know, we won't go on for too long because I know you're all probably keen to get onto the music and drinks, which is afterwards. And if you didn't know about that, after this event there will be Peruvian music and drinks at the Lotus Hall, which you're all welcome to come along to. So, has anyone got any questions for the panellists? We covered it all. Okay, I'll take the mic up. And mic up.
Thank you very much. Just a quick comment.
Maybe talk up too, because I'm not sure if the mic is... It's working.
Just a quick comment, if anything. I'd just like to just counter any impression the audience might have got about any arduousness about visiting places like Rio Tinto Park. It's important for the audience to understand I've been there, and other Amazonian lodges. It's relatively luxurious. It's actually quite easy to get to it. The trip up the river is actually quite pleasant. Because the Amazon is actually quite flat, so the tracks you do with the guides and stuff is actually quite pleasant. You're in the shade and things like that. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thanks very much. So if you go, you won't be expected to climb trees and camp on riverbanks and have, what was it jaguar sit and watch you all night. Not always part of the deal.
I think it's wonderful that Indigenous people are involved with, their commerce and developing ecotourism, but possibly as ecotourism grows, there'll be additional pressure on that. And I'm just wondering, is there any forward planning to limit tourist numbers? Because, if it becomes too popular, all those evils that were mentioned in the videos will destroy that environment anyway.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, there is a regulation by the Natural Reserve authorities. So there's like Machu Picchu, the same way, like only 500 people can enter to Machu Picchu or whatever is the number these days. And the same, there's a regulation for the natural reserves in Peru as well. And it's really interesting because now in the Tambopata Research Center, they just applied for rebuilding it because it's getting really old, and the previous lodge was actually washed away. And so, because it was like too close to the river, but they tried to rebuild it or make some more facilities. But for that application, the reserve put it very, very clearly for us that we can't have any more rooms that they already have, like we have 18 rooms. So the capacity needs to stay the same, like it needs to host the same number of people. So I hear you that's more and more people coming there might generate more traffic as well. But I think it's mainly under control so far.
Any other questions? Pass that along.
Just a question to George about when you were tagging the chicks up in the boxes. Did you have any problems with either parents abandoning them after they've been handled or with them not then returning to nests? Was that ever an issue, or those kind of problems that you might have had?
Yeah, sure. So the one, you mean the satellite color that we put them in? Yeah, we only put them on adult macaws, so never put them on chicks because they're too young and they're just about to learn how to fly and they're a bit clumsy, even without this 28 grams device on them. So we never put on chicks, but only captured adults that we monitor them, like as Rod just said, they come back to the same nest, usually every year. So we can, as we band them as well, we can recognize them that that's the same couple coming back to nest in that artificial natural nest, and we did see them coming back with the same tagged macaw, and they never had any issue with the color, like they were still together and they still raised more chicks, and it was really interesting because it's really hard to recapture those birds, but since they reused those nests, it was because one of these devices can just transmit up to 9 months or something, but by recapturing them and replacing this color as we showed in the documentary as well, we were able to track them actually 2 and 3 years continuously and see their movement, and they never had a problem. They just came back, got another color, new shiny one. So there's also a volunteer program there that we have lots of volunteers working for the Macaw Project, and one of their jobs is monitor all those nests very intensively, where we captured and put the satellite tag on, just to see any behavioral changes, and they looked all good.
But there was footage of you pulling chicks out, and those chicks were quite happy going back to the nest, and the parents were okay with that?
That was, they never ever abandoned the chick. So they really got used to it around this region. But also in other parts, like in Canberra, when we monitor chick, we put back the chick, and they actually were waiting, the parents are waiting outside, and as soon as we're down there, they inside the nest.
I think I saw a hand flutter somewhere down here. Someone touching the nose. Okay.
I might be able to shout it.
Okay.
Is anything being done on the restoration of these huge areas of lunar landscape produced by mining? I mean, eventually succession will occur, but it may take, I'm just wondering how many years, whether it's, probably hundreds of years, and it may, of course, it may never restore it to the original rainforest. But I'm just wondering if any work is being done on that, even as part of the project. Because, that's one problem. The other one is that, as you showed by the illustration of the big city there, the growing population and the desire for farming.
Yeah, that was all happening while I was doing my PhD there, so it was really interesting to see all these changes, and that was one of the reasons when we came up, we should really show this to, internationally. What's happening, which is quite sad, and we didn't have the bridge, and then 2 years later we had the bridge ready, and it was really just growing, and lots of land clearing were happening near the Puerto, and with all the gold mining, it's just very sad. And there's a foundation called the Amazon Gold Foundation that they made actually 2 documentaries about those problems, which is really interesting and really recommend you to watch. And they provided some of those footage for us that you saw from the air. I'm not aware of any restoration project going on. It's like very sensitive issue. I know that, like, for example, in Refugio Amazonas, one of the largest, they did clear that like 50 years ago, and now it's a secondary forest. So it grew back, and that was cleared because of agriculture. The community used that land for agriculture and hunting. So the deal with them is when they build Refugio Amazonas is that they can still come back because they collect castaña, the Brazil nut. There's like lots of wild Brazil nut in that region, so they're still coming back and collecting Brazil nut, but they're not allowed to hunt, but the rainforest expedition gives them food, meals, and lodge to stay. And that was another really good deal because we just monitored in the last 10 years, and all the big mammals are coming back, and more sightings are in around Refugio Amazonas. So I think it's really positive that it is possible to have a secondary forest grown, but not sure about the gold mining.
We might take one last question if there is one. No? You're ready for your more Peruvian drinks? All right, thank you to the panelists. And I'd like to invite Francesco, who's Francesco? to draw the raffle or announce the winner of the raffle.
The lucky winner. Yeah, sorry.
Somebody's already drunk.
Good start.